Welcome to a special edition of Legal AF. We are at Netroots Nation, and we are joined by my colleague Lisa Graves and Representative Jamie Raskin. So much to talk about, Representative Raskin. I want to kick it off with the Anti-Weaponization Fund and your new bill that you've proposed using Todd Blanche's name as the acronym. We'll talk more about that, to block the super pardon. The thing that didn't get a lot of press on day one, because they announced it on day two after the settlement, where Todd Blanche, on his own, without the other parties, just decided to amend the settlement agreement related to Trump versus the IRS and add a provision that exonerated or gave immunity or a pardon to Trump and the Trump family for decades of tax liability and audit exposure.
But not just tax liability, any criminal or civil liability at all.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the fact that it wasn't signed by, quote, the other side demonstrates that they viewed themselves as just one team,
Yes.
the Department of Justice and Donald Trump, the plaintiff, working together to rip off the taxpayers.
So a week from tomorrow, Judge Williams in Miami is holding, or she's getting final briefing about whether she had been had, about whether there was a fraud on the court and a deceit of the court in the way the lawsuit was filed by Donald Trump's lawyers and the Department of Justice and the IRS, and the settlement of that, which allegedly gave power to the Department of Justice to settle and compromise those claims. While we're waiting for that briefing, as we came on the air late last night, they filed a paper with two judges that said, oh no, the fund is dead. The fund is dead. How do we know? Because he responded to a question from one of your colleagues and said the fund was dead, Todd Blanche. No affidavit submitted, no other explanation about the super pardon. So,
In fact, he said he would not commit it to writing. He said, I
Yes.
know this is being recorded. These people, they behave completely outside of the law. So this is all about the term weaponization or the term lawfare, which don't exist in law. Nobody's ever passed a federal or state law around it. And then he says it's dead. Well, that's not a legal concept. Have they withdrawn and terminated this fund for all time? Because when he says it's dead, we know that Trump can say tomorrow it's alive. In fact, Trump says he still loves the idea.
absolutely.
And in any event, they have not foreclosed the possibility of just using money directly from the judgment fund, which is what they did for Michael Flynn, the disgraced former national security advisor. They just wrote him a check for $1.25 million after he had already lost the case.
And Ashley Babbitt's family.
Right.
$5 million, despite the fact two different federal investigations said that the police had acted reasonably and
Right.
lawfully in repelling the mob violent attack on the Congress and the vice president. So these people are acting like absolute bandits. It's a gangster state right now.
Right.
So let's talk about the Blanche Act that you've proposed. We see Scott Bessent getting his backside handed to him by your colleagues about the attempt to wipe away years of tax and audit liability. Todd Blanche has not yet had to answer for that in Congress, but he will with your act. Talk about the Super Pardon Act the Blanche Act that you've just proposed.
Well, it shuts down both this specific one and any attempts to do the same thing in the future. The president should not be able to bring a lawsuit against the government and then settle the lawsuit by giving himself permanent lifetime immunity from any crimes or civil offenses committed. And in this case, it applies not just to Trump, but to his whole family. So this is about insider trading. This is about political corruption. It's about bribery. It could be about rape and sexual assault. In the Epstein files, they've dealt themselves a get out of jail free card for all time. And so the legislation would stop that, both precluding this specific agreement, but then any attempt to do the same thing in the future. And we have legislation to do the exact same thing with this super slush fund.
Now, they just filed late last night in front of Judge Brinkema their argument that she no longer has jurisdiction because it's now been mooted because he's announced publicly that there won't be any fund, and then repeats the lie that the Trump family is not getting any benefit out of the settlement.
Right.
I mean, how do you interpret the amendment and what you just said about exoneration and immunity to get out of jail free pass if it's not a benefit to Trump directly?
Well, dozens of federal judges have excoriated the Department of Justice and the administration for lying and falsely representing in court. And this is just one more example. And I hope they are denounced, and I hope that they are sanctioned for that. They are complete outlaws when it comes to the federal judiciary.
Yeah. What did you make of in the Senate, the Democrats trying to force the Republicans in the Senate to vote up or down on the weaponization fund as part of ICE, and their refusal to do that? They had the opportunity to put a stake through the heart of that fund once and for all, and they refused to do it in their voting.
Well, the Democrats are trying to get the Republicans to put their votes where their mouths are, because a lot of them have been denouncing this, understanding that there is an avalanche of public criticism about this. This is one that has broken through the corruption sound barrier, because people have become inured and kind of immune to all of the corruption, which is our daily bread in Washington. But this one was such a blatant assault on every legal and constitutional principle we got, to take nearly $1.8 billion from the taxpayers to give to convicted criminals, insurrectionists. It looks like 1.25 million is the going rate now, because they used that for Michael Flynn. They used it for Carter Page. You do the math, and it kind of covers the 1.776 billion, leaving 100 or 200 million left over for Donald Trump to, deal out to his other political foot soldiers and cronies.
Well, please.
Representative Raskin, I really appreciate your leadership on these issues. The clarion call of calling this out for what it is, which is a crime. It certainly seems to be a crime to me. And the fact that what's happened here is not just the slush fund that they announced, but as you point out, the slush fund that is behind the scenes, where they're already paying without any accountability, and they may be entering into secrecy agreements to basically push money out the door, millions of our tax dollars, to enrich these January 6th violent actors, and who could possibly use that money to buy arms, who think that they can act with impunity because they've been given immunity by Donald Trump. So we have a Justice Department that is not acting like a Justice Department. Can you talk a little bit about the fact that there were no motions filed by Todd Blanche, no efforts to dismiss this IRS case, which was bogus in the beginning, $10 billion for a leak, but also no action, ignoring the actions of IRS lawyers, saying there are ways to dismiss this, because it was all a scheme, it seems, just to enrich Donald Trump and Donald Trump's loyalists.
So there was a leak by a private government contractor, a third-party government contractor, which included some of Donald Trump's tax information. Now, Trump, of course, had been promising to release it for a long time, the way every other president has released their taxes, and he was promising to do it. Nonetheless, he didn't do it, and
somebody did it for him.
Somebody did it for him. That was a crime. And Charles Littlejohn, the private government contractor, did that, is in jail. He's gone to jail. Now, there were thousands of other people who had their tax returns released unlawfully by Littlejohn, and some of those people decided to try and sue the federal government. The Department of Justice took the position that the federal government itself is not liable for a situation where a third-party government contractor releases the information, and aggressively pursued that, and has so far won that. Now, that means when Donald Trump brought his fraudulent $10 billion action, they should have just filed the exact same brief they had in these other cases, but they didn't. They decided in his case they were going to settle the case for $1.776 billion, and then on completely unrelated criminal civil tax matters that have nothing to do with the release of his tax information, they were going to immunize Donald Trump and his family forever. The two things have nothing to do with each other, proving that Todd Blanche is not qualified, ethically, professionally qualified to be the Attorney General of the United States. He cut his former client, or really his current client, a very sweetheart deal in doing that, and completely betrayed the standards governing government law enforcement.
And this is
I have one more follow-up question. I know there's more, but let me just say, this question of this immunity for Donald Trump, his family, for all of his corporations, unknown and unknown, for release of liability for civil and criminal liability, basically across the board.
Forever, as the all caps said.
Forever. This to me is the bookend to John Roberts giving Donald Trump immunity for so-called official acts as president, which John Roberts and the Roberts Court invented. That did not give enough immunity to Donald Trump and his family. So Todd Blanche comes in to save the day to give him even broader immunity than this terrible counter-constitutional decision of the Supreme Court.
That's right.
What
Well, that's
can
a
we
great
do?
point.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great point because the Supreme Court, in its decadent Roberts Court vision, decided for the first time in American history that the president should be immune from prosecution for felony crimes
Yes.
committed under the core operations of his office. Okay. That's an outrageous, astonishing notion, which is plucked out of thin air. It's not rooted in the text of the Constitution or the original understanding of the Constitution. Nothing. They just made it up. Like the stork brought that. But it at least was confined to that idea that it was the president himself operating under the auspices of his office. Now, this Department of Justice Blanche pardon goes to Trump, his entire family, for all time, for any crimes or civil offenses committed that the government might be able to bring actions on. And that cannot stand. This is creating a monarchical class, an oligarchy, which doesn't have any law applied to them. That's for everybody else. That's for the common people.
So Judge Williams, on a week from Friday, she's reopened the IRS case in response to being implored to do so by 35 former federal judges led by Judge Michael Luttig. I just had Michael Luttig on, Judge Luttig on, to talk about it. And she wants to hear from the Department of Justice, the Internal Revenue Service, and Donald Trump's private lawyers. I mean, they're all the same thing. Specifically about how they could have settled an illegal case that had no merit, no adversariness between the parties, to do a settlement that therefore was illegal, which therefore makes that Todd Blanche could not settle or compromise the case under the Judgment Act. And she wants a full accounting. Particularly, I want to know whether there's been a fraud on the court, whether there's been a deception on the court, meaning the settlement agreement, and the lawyers like Todd Blanche. So what's he going to do next Friday when he has to answer to Judge Williams?
Well, they've got their hands full dealing with this because they're used to getting away with it. This judge is acting like a real judge. And, all glory to her and every other federal judge that is willing to take on this reign of lawlessness. The fraud on the court is going to be, if it goes through, a fraud on the country and on the taxpayers. So I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know how they're going to get over the fact that not only was there no legal substance to his claim, as proven by the position the Department of Justice has taken in exactly parallel cases, but it also came several months too late after the statute of limitations had expired. And they didn't even allege that. You had this 25-page memo from the IRS lawyers saying, we can knock this thing down. There's nothing to it. And instead, he decides to use it as the pretext for this fraud on the country with the settlement.
And even the analysis was being kind because Trump learned about the disclosure of his tax returns years before. They used the date that Alina Habba went to the sentencing of Charles Littlejohn as the last outside date, and he still missed it by 3 or 4 months. And then when you read the settlement agreement, this is where the judge is going to be really upset. Not only do they cite the settlement, the case to give it an imprimatur of being legitimate, but then the lawyer about a case the judge was about to throw out the window says, I'm going to amend the case to make it a class action to bring in this is how they were going to broaden the case to compromise the claims. How are you going to amend a case that the judge was about to dismiss for lack of adversariness?
And lack of adversariness means that basically the two sides are colluding for a fraud on the court. And, in this case, it means there's no standing to bring the action because there's no case for controversy. They're not fighting about anything. They're working together to try to pull a fast one to take nearly $2 billion from the American people and then to deal themselves criminal and civil immunity forever.
Because if they didn't have a proper settlement, then Donald Trump is just stealing from the Treasury.
Which is our daily bread in Washington. I mean, that is what's going on here. This is not an administration that's got a plan to lower gas prices. On the contrary, their illegal, unconstitutional war in Iran is driving them up. It's not an administration that's got a plan to get health care to everybody in the richest country on earth. No, it's a government that operates like the Sopranos. Like, what grift are they going to be able to get away with today against the American people? Is it going to be a crypto grift? Is it going to be foreign government emoluments? Is it going to be a $400 million jet that we take from Qatar? I mean, it is a gangster state that we are up against at this point.
But one of the things that gives me hope, Representative, is Freedom Summer and all of the work that you are spearheading with amazing people from across the country. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I would love to. Now, our project is Democracy Summer, named after Freedom
Yes,
Summer,
yes.
and the people
Yes.
used to kick it off were our beloved colleague John Lewis,
Yes.
who we've lost, and Bob Moses, who we lost. But both of them were regular participants who would come and talk about what young people did during the Freedom Summer, during the organizing of Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, going out to register people to vote. We have a new generation of badly needed young activists and leaders across the country who are fighting to defend the right to vote and democracy and freedom. Last summer, we had 1,000 young people do it. This summer, we're very close to getting 2,000 young people to do it. And in the mornings, we're on Zoom with Heather Cox Richardson or Tim Snyder or Benny Thompson, my co-chair, Maxwell Frost. We're engaged in a course on the struggle for democracy and freedom in America, and then the fight for democracy and freedom today, taking place all over the country. And then they go out, they knock on doors, they canvass, they register voters. And so we still have the opportunity to bring some other young people in. If you know some young people who are feeling the spirit of 2026, what happened in Minneapolis, what's going on in Louisiana and Texas, all over the country, sign up for Democracy Summer. We got opportunities in all 50 states for young people to be
And
involved.
we'll put the link for that in the notes below.
Yeah, and especially with what the court just did on the Calais case and what they just did in Alabama, I think people and young people in particular are outraged by this effort to bleach out the Black Caucus, this effort to twist the results in the coming midterm elections, to have the Supreme Court intervene. And so are you seeing a surge in interest in Democracy Summer?
Very much so.
Yeah.
I mean, the young people understand that the Roberts Court and MAGA are rapidly trying to dismantle every majority African-American district in the Deep South. And that's dangerous. They're getting rid of both the Black members from the deep Southern states, the representatives of majority African-American districts from the Deep South, and also the only Democrats left there because the Republican legislatures are trying to gerrymander us into oblivion. So we're talking about how we mobilize, how we organize, but also a new generation of solutions to these problems, looking at things like multi-member districts with instant runoff voting, proportional representation, ranked choice voting. We explain all of that. We get into it because these are the young people who are going to be able both to mobilize massive political turnout in 2026, but also develop the legislative solutions that we need going forward. Our first Democracy Summer fellow has just been elected to public office here in Pennsylvania, where we are today, which is very exciting. She's just in her mid-20s, but she won a hotly contested nomination for a Democratic House seat. And so she's going to be going to the Pennsylvania legislature, and we're proud of her and all the Democracy Summer alumni around the country who are still engaged with us in this struggle. We're in the fight of our lives, and they know it.
Yeah. One last question, Representative Raskin. When we watch the attack on Black representation in the South, when we watch the attempt to, as my colleague said, whitewash America, do you think it's having the opposite impact on the electorate? That even though I don't live in Alabama, I don't like what the Republican Party led by Donald Trump is doing to undermine Black representation. It just runs afoul of our democratic ideals, of what it means to be a patriot and a true patriot. And do you think that in the short term, Trump thinks he's scoring cheap electoral points, but in the long term or at the midterms, isn't there a chance of a tremendous backlash because people are watching this and saying, that's not my America?
Well, I was sitting with my colleague Benny Thompson on Thursday night before we recessed, and he had just had a rally in Mississippi in Jackson of 7,000 or 8,000 people who came out to protest against the dismemberment of his district. But also what's taking place across the country. So I think that there will be a short-term loss because of the dismantling of the majority Black districts. But your point is correct, which is it is unleashing a huge new voting rights movement across the country. And people in the North are going to stand strong with people in the South. And we're going to turn this thing around. We've been trying to get rid of partisan redistricting for a decade now. And we're going to have to get back to that when we get in, but come up with the solutions that will make sure everybody can be represented. Because right now, the only way we can really fight back is to go to the majority Democratic states like California, New York, Michigan, Maryland, and say, now gerrymander the Republicans into oblivion. Do to them what they're doing to us. Well, that's not a healthy long-term dynamic for the country, but we're going to have to do it to fight fire with fire. But we do have to come up with the creative solutions that will allow people to be represented all over the country.
Yep.
So that there are Democrats getting elected in Republican states and Republicans getting elected in Democratic states. If you look around the world, people know how to do this, and America's got to do it too.
Yeah. And speaking directly here at the end to our 6 or 7 million people on the Midas Mighty and the Legal AFers, what can you tell them? What should they be doing right now to contribute to democracy and to make sure that all the things that you've just talked about come true? Because they are champing at the bit to get off the couch and go do something for democracy. Well, if you had to give them 1 or 2 things to do, what should they do?
Well, in general, follow Navalny's advice. If you read Navalny's book, Patriot, go out and tell the truth every day about what's happening in our country. All of our institutions are under attack by the Trump administration. They've turned the government into an instrument of private self-enrichment, as we've been talking about. But if you want to get involved with what we're doing with young people, which would be great, get in touch with Democracy Summer. You can find Democracy Summer online, and we're working all over America to win back the House of Representatives and win back the Senate for the party of democracy and freedom.
Absolutely. Representative Jamie Raskin here live at Netroots Nation with Legal AF, Michael Popak and Lisa Graves. Always an honor, sir.
Michael, thank you. And thank you, Lisa. Hang tough, you guys.
Thank you so much.